Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our colleagues who joined this session titled Why Individualized Medical Communication Eludes Us in an Era of Individualized Medicine. We have the title slide up. We chose this title because it acknowledges, I think, that while we've had advancements in medicine, our communications mindset in some instances has largely remained the same over the same time period. My name is Sandeep Gantodi. I'm Associate VP here at Indigene. Medical affairs functions interact with clinical community in many ways. In an increasingly competitive environment, medical affairs is challenged to engage with very time-starved clinicians. Apart from timely, accurate, and trustworthy data we disseminate, are there other factors which distinguish an individual customer's experience between multiple companies? Do our customers place value on individualized communication? Today, we have two medical affairs leaders who think about questions such as these. I'd like to welcome Brooke Patterson and Humberto Fonseca. If you could just introduce yourselves briefly, and we'll get things kicked off. Over to you, Brooke.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Brooke Patterson. I am the therapeutic area lead for leukemia and lymphoma at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. I have been in various medical affairs functions with J&J for 15 years now across multiple therapeutic areas. And prior to that, I spent my time in Kansas City. I had an academic appointment at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and practiced at the Kansas City Free Health Clinic.
Great. Thank you so much. Humberto?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation as well. It's a pleasure to be here today, and also I'm very excited to join this important conversation on individualized medical communication. So I'm a medical doctor by training. I'm a former clinician. I worked as a general practitioner. I completed recently, actually, a master's in digital healthcare, and currently I work at Ferring Pharmaceuticals, and I serve as Director of Global Medical Engagement. My journey so far has included a few years in medical affairs leadership, focused on respiratory medicine and also immunology, as well as clinical oncology research experience, well, particularly in brain tumors such as glioblastoma multiforme. And Brooke, it's also great to share this panel with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Thank you both, and we really appreciate your participation today. If you could have the next slide up, please. Just as a reminder to the audience that all the conversation, discussions that we're having, and views and opinions are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of our employers or organizations. Just a note to the audience, as we're proceeding through, if there are any questions that do come to your mind, we invite you to please place those in the chat feature on your platform. Okay, let's kick things off now. So medical affairs organizations, and put the next slide up. Yeah, medical affairs organizations realize the value of adopting customer-centric mindset and capabilities to enhance the experience. In a joint position paper that was done across several medical affairs leaders, individualization actually came up as one of the core tenets or core criteria to delivering a good experience. In your minds, what does individualization mean? Why is it important as we in medical affairs plan our engagements with our stakeholders? Maybe we'll start with Brooke with your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise to anyone that there is way more data than time to look and review it. And so that to me is really the driving force behind why we need to have individualized content that meets the needs of the providers that we're working with. We're all competing for time. And in the absence of individualization, it just becomes background noise. So I think that's where we have to make sure that we're providing clear communication that is actionable by the provider and meets the needs of their particular practice.
Thank you. Humberto, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe building on what Brooke was just saying, we're all competing for time. So we need to make sure that whatever we're delivering is adding value to the clinician, but also to the patients. So for me, it's about tailoring not just the message, but actually the mode of delivery and the moment itself where we should deliver these key messages. And also, like I was saying before, the meaning behind this delivery. As a clinician, but also the feedback we got from peers is that they see content or the context shapes the impact, right? And sometimes a PDF in someone's inbox during patient hours becomes invisible, right? So I believe that, you know, individualization means understanding the emotional, the cognitive, and also the clinical intent behind it. And I believe that's at the end of the day what's going to build even more trust.
Great, thank you. Great insight, and I think that leads us really into the next point. You can have the next slide up, please. So our medical communications functions, as we've discussed, have really the challenge of imparting knowledge, but also to gain insights against the backdrop of very busy schedules. This slide, I think, is an interesting one, also a scary one, in the sense that it basically shows that if you take a typical clinician's time from the morning, they get up, have their breakfast, go to practice, care for patients, their day is very packed, right? There's very few opportunities to kind of really create a lot of impact, as we talked about. Do you think that individualized communication creates enough of a value for a customer? As you said, there's a lot of noise out there. We want to be beyond background noise. We want to be something that's impactful, useful. Maybe Humberto, will start with you. Do you think that the individualization of communication is enough of a value add that kind of cuts through a lot of the noise that the clinicians feel?
Absolutely. In my opinion, it's like trash in, trash out, right? So when the communication is individualized, it feels like less noise, but more value, like we were saying before, right? So one of the biggest lessons that I've learned so far is that clinicians and HCPs as a whole, they don't really engage more because they're just curious. They engage because they think it's useful. It's not so time consuming, so it will be more timely, and it's easy at the end of the day. So it's easy to digest that information that we're trying to convey. And in field teams, I've also seen physicians in the past, they lean in when the message connects also emotionally and to the point that they really want to hear. So absolutely agree with your question.
Thanks. Anything to add, Brooke?
Yeah, I mean, I think Humberto really touched on something there at the end, which is that so often with communications, we push out what we think the HCP wants to hear or wants to know. And the most effective communication is the communication that meets the needs of the HCP, where they drive the mode, the method, and the amount of information. And that's a major paradigm shift, right? And so I'm really interested as we move into the future of how do we make sure we are centering the HCP and clinician in the communications and building around that versus pushing from our ivory tower out to them, assuming we know what they're looking for.
No, great point. As I think about both of your roles and profiles, I know, Brooke, your role is US centric, and Humberto, yours is more of an international sort of scope. Do you think this is a universal principle? So in other words, are there sort of local, regional nuances you think that our peers should think about as we talk about individualized communications. Love to hear your thoughts on that. And Brooke,
I think I
was
can
some-
speak from the US perspective. Yeah, I do think we struggle with regulatory-wise what is and isn't appropriate, particularly coming from a medical organization, right? And that I know has been an area of much discussion and consternation amongst myself and colleagues on what the FDA says is and isn't allowable. But I also think there is, and it's incredibly and vitally important to be compliant. I don't want to dismiss that because I do find that really should be our North Star. But I do think the time is now to really expand those conversations. And there's a real opportunity to think about how we interpret our current guidances and maybe what we need to hear from regulators in order to move into a more individualized content approach.
Bertha, any insights or thoughts from the international perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think yes to your question in terms of the type of approaches when compared, for example, what Brooke was saying from the US perspective versus ex-US. And I think that often is perceived more than real. Sometimes it's complicated to bring so many regions and countries into the table, especially cross-functionally. But I think what I've been seeing that works quite well, it's to embed medical governance and legal partners already in the design phase. So co-creation over policing at the end of the day. That's something that I've seen also other colleagues jumping into quite early in this co-creation aspect. I can give an example. In Europe, even though we have GDPR, for instance, it can be managed quite well from a regional perspective. But then when you try to actually tailor the message to different countries, then you have local codes of conduct for each individual country that then you need to take into account. Right. So it is quite challenging to have this harmonized, individualized approach from a global perspective when you have so many challenges at a country level. So even our colleagues at the country level, they probably feel very frustrated getting something from global, then having to localize every little bits of content to fit their current legal framework. So to what Brooke was saying, I completely agree. I mean, there needs to be some sort of alignment as well between regulators. And I know it's quite hard between, FDA, EMA, for instance, but there should be at least some common ground where we could actually look into what good looks like from the US perspective, what good looks like from ex-US perspective, and try to find some common way to move forward together.
No, absolutely. I think what you're saying is let's start to make progress, right? We're not going to get it perfect right off the bat, but we need to start having the conversations and moving forward. Very, very good practical advice. Just kind of moving on a bit. So we've established that there's value in individualizing communications. I think that's very clear. We have so many opportunities to engage with our stakeholders proactively, reactively, across different channels and different formats. You're both from clinical backgrounds. And so I'm thinking about this picture on the slide, looking at kind of an average clinician's day. They're doing a variety of things. They're in with patients. The very, very sparse amount of time they may actually have to sit and consume something that you provide to them. Could you each think of one part of a clinical decision-making pathway where actually individualization makes a big difference? Is there one part of that? So would it be, for example, at the point of care, or is it perhaps providing that information maybe during a period of time where there's time for reflection? Any thoughts on that? If you could, provide your ideas on that. Is there any particular scenario where individualization makes a big difference in your mind?
Yeah, I certainly think point of care is probably the most impactful and where you feel maybe the most sense of urgency, right? To find an answer or to to get the information you're looking for. I mean, I remember carrying around like big notebooks in my pocket back in the day when I went through training, where, you know, I'd be scurrying looking for something like dosing, and then that got replaced with Palm Pilots, right? And then it was a little more electronic. But now I think the issue is that there are so many different options, and what can be the most succinct, and then, you know, if you want a second opinion or third, I mean, there's some great organizations out there that are doing some sort of consults in a pocket, which I think is a really interesting and exciting idea. But yeah, I think that that's, to me, where the need is the highest and the urgency is the greatest.
Hey, Humberto, your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe more practical, and I agree also with the point of care that will create immediate impact, and we could see that also in the organization afterwards. So that will be the value as well, added both to the physician but also to the patient. I would also add, because we were talking a little bit about individualization as we started this discussion. One thing that I like to see, for example, is the consent. When we ask for consent from clinicians, I think we should also already add value to when the physicians agree to provide consent to something. And unfortunately, I've seen this across the industry that even myself, as a former clinician, I experienced this where I would give consent, but I would never get anything of value back. And so I think this identifying early as a micro journey, for example, if the consent is given, if that's one of the challenges you're trying to overcome, to increase the number of consents, then you should be able to provide value after the consent is given, and adding value not just at some point, but adding value as soon as possible. You know, again, it comes to the timely discussion we're also having. Physicians are very occupied with different matters, so we need to make sure that we get them at the right point when they are available, and if that can happen right away after they provide consent, that will be great.
Really interesting thought, and I think something we can all take to heart as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit now about implementing the individualized communication. We can have the next slide up, please. So this level of communication doesn't happen overnight, clearly. In your minds, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. If we kind of look at this the stages on the slide, I think this roughly describes, you know, with maybe differences in different organizations, roughly how organizations might be approaching this. I'm wondering if you could give us your views on, as an industry, not necessarily your specific organization, but as an industry, you know, where do we think we are actually in this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, Humberto, we'll start with you on this one.
Good question. I think we're probably somewhere between scaling the intent and actually trying to embed some behavior. I think from my experience and talking with other colleagues in the industry, I think we're somewhere there, because we talk a lot about tools and platforms and whatnot, but I think, you know, we need to look into the foundation, into processes, into having the culture that actually can build upon what we are envisioning for the future. And the mindset is lagging behind, in my perspective. So I think one of the key enablers would be medical affairs having both the data access, but also the digital fluency to possibly act on insights with more agility. That would be something that, in my view, could be a key enabler.
Okay. Brooke, any
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I think it's the desire and the understanding of the need is there. And I think, seeing what our commercial counterparts have done is certainly is helpful, but I don't believe it's a just lift and shift. And so I think the building the capabilities within the organization continues and needs to be a focus for what's appropriate for medical affairs, and then eventually hopefully we'll get to a point where we can measure and improve it and scale it up.
For sure. I think you touched on a couple of things, working cross-functionally. On that note, what are the different team members and parts of the organization that we think as medical affairs we need to be more actively engaged with as we go down this pathway? Brooke, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think insights and analytics is a really important and valuable partner to how we can use insights to create that individualized content. Obviously, our medical and scientific communications colleagues, there is an incredible amount of wealth and knowledge there, and I think excitement about changing the way we do things. And then I would say our regulatory partners. And, to Umberto's point, having them early, I think, is essential. And then along every step of the way.
Umberto, any other thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, the insights, it's kind of a buzzword lately, right? But it's because of its importance. And I don't think it's been yet explored fully. How can we actually act on those insights with precision and with speed and with the agility that I was mentioning before? We always try to find different qualitative and quantitative impact metrics to showcase to senior leadership. So we can also contribute with just like our colleagues in commercial, with different data-driven activities. And so I would still stick to insights and try to find different metrics for impact. Possibly also, if I may add, also congresses. Try to maybe explore congresses and the way we orchestrate congresses in a more agile way, and also explore a little bit more, not just the event itself, but the pre and post event. I think that would be also something I would emphasize here.
So the importance of data and analytics cannot be understated, and both of you have reinforced that. I mean, in a lot of conversations with our colleagues, we hear about data fragmentation, right? So different silos and so on. If indeed individualization of communication is built on understanding those insights, do you think the challenges have been more in terms of lack of integration of data, or do you think it's actually more of a cultural issue? So what I mean by that is, this is a very different way of working, right? Planning, communications, moving from sort of a gut feeling, or this is what we've always done, to more of a data-driven approach, which actually may fly in the face of what we instinctually think should be a particular way of communicating. Do you think it's a bit of both, or do you see a little bit more of one or over the other? Humberto, maybe you can start up for that one.
Yeah, I was going to ask if I can say that it's both, not choosing one or the other. I do think it's both. From a technology lens, I think fragmentation and lack of real-time integration, for example, are essential and critical. But then when you look into the cultural aspect of it, there is risk aversion from regulatory, for example. From a medical legal perspective, the fear of non-compliance usually stops things. They become bottlenecks, right? So the teams become paralyzed in a way, right? Even if you're trying a new engagement format or model, there will be always some extra bottlenecks because it goes a little bit outside of their comfort zone. But that's why I said before, I think we do need compliance by design, and thinking early and involving them early as we move along into the co-creation process.
Look, any other ideas to add to that?
So I think, the one thing that came to mind as we were talking about this is a lot of these platforms and things that we've looked into, I know have considerable budget involved, and the way our budgets are built. I mean, this is just a mechanics piece, right? An operational piece. But I think even operationally, how we think about medical communications and what comes from medical affairs, at least in the US, or at least in the structure that I know, is also a barrier, right? Is that doing some of this work is really taking an investment maybe that has not always been allotted to medical, but maybe to our commercial partners. So I think that's another piece that, I think about even when we've been able to align everything right with regulatory and others is how do we even get to the table to have the right investment to do that?
No, that's a great point. I think that sometimes we fixate on certain technical aspects, but I think you raise an important point there in terms of resourcing and budgeting as well. Thanks for that insight. Again, between the panel here, we're representing large market, obviously in the U.S., and then we have international markets as well. I think we touched a little bit earlier on some of the regulatory guardrails or apprehensions that there might be in terms of approaching individualized communication. Could you speak briefly on some of the barriers that you've seen? Clearly, when we think about individualized communications, it involves understanding a lot about specific people. So it's capturing personal information, identifiable information. Could you talk about any sort of hesitations, apprehensions that you've seen that our colleagues should think about and look to mitigate as we think about individualized communication? Humberto, if you have a view on that.
Again, maybe going back this time to congresses, and if you're thinking about an international congress that year after year jumps from one country to the other, it always brings a lot of resistance from a compliance, from a medical legal perspective. You'll have to involve local colleagues that, depending on the country itself, might be understaffed and under-resourced when compared to others and when compared to a global organization. So even if you start early, it doesn't mean that that challenge will be overcome. Like Brooke was saying just now, in terms of budget and resources, right? It aligns perfectly, I think, given this example with congresses. And we spend so much time also planning for a congress that it's sometimes a missed opportunity for us to do more. But it's just how complicated it is, again, coming back to regulatory and misalignment between regulatory bodies and different regions. That's why I think it's even more important now to start this discussion on how can we have something more standardized so we actually bring the value to physicians, to patients, by having a more standardized and common way of looking into things, just like congresses, for example.
Okay. So more of a standardized, like almost a playbook of sorts, maybe like a set of standards or approaches that largely hold true across different markets, but then realizing there may be some specific nuances that are required. It's something like that is what you're referring to?
Yeah, something like that. For instance, in most of the countries, if you don't have a market authorization for a product, you're not able to have a discussion about that product itself. You can talk very much about disease awareness and the impact for the patient, right? But maybe if it could be, within the dossier has been submitted to authorities for approval for that market authorization, maybe during that time that the process is pending, maybe that could be a little bit of an opening to talk a little bit more about the product itself, not just about disease awareness. I know there's been some discussions, but regulatory bodies are a little bit strict, not so much agile, for the right reasons as well. They try to protect, patients and the way that they interact with different stakeholders. But there should be at least a discussion on how can we improve things from all different stakeholders.
Understood. Yeah, Brooke, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think how we look at proactivity or proactive communications from medical, at least in the US, it is maybe, and certainly it varies by organization, but I think that's where the FDA guidance maybe becomes a little, I don't want to use the word vague, but I think up for interpretation. And so if proactive communication is considered a type of commercial activity, then that certainly limits us. And I think that's a little bit what Umberto was talking about. And so, whether that comes from our field medical or from our home office medical, certainly how we interpret that and what the guidance allows is going to greatly impact what we're able to do, and particularly our ability to individualize it. Although I would say that, to touch upon something that came up earlier about opting in or giving permissions, that to me is an area where, and I think you said this, there's a lot of opportunity for impact and also to be able to tailor moving forward our communications. And so and should be a way that we can compliantly provide information. And so I think there's something to that piece as well of when we make initial contact, what we are able to discuss and hear what the provider wants and needs should help us stay compliant, because it's not just I'm blasting out a quote unquote message versus I'm providing an important opportunity for education and conversation.
A great point, definitely. I want to just put on our imagination for a moment and just think about if you could, have a magic wand and you could kind of outline a perfect outcome to this. That we're able to, we have understood the regulatory requirements, we understand the clinician pain points in the patient journey, etc. What in your mind, if you could each give your thought on that, what would be the ideal outcome of this? So if we were able to individualize treatment, what's the outcome we're ultimately looking for if we think about our medical affairs lens? Brooke, let you take a shot at that one first.
My colleague Kristen says this, it's right information, right provider at the right time. To me, it's as simple as that, is that any provider could get the information that they need, whether it's at point of care or as they're preparing for clinic or as they're studying for boards at the time that they want it without having to dig much. And in the right amount. That to me would be the ideal outcome of individualized scientific communications.
Great. How about you, Humberto? What would be your ideal outcome?
I agree with what Brooke was saying. I would maybe think about, now with the recent guidance from FDA, from other governing bodies in terms of involving patients also in clinical trial design, I would try to bring in as much patient-reported outcomes and improve patient outcomes, get that patient experience data from different sources and bring it back to clinical development, so we can also showcase to regulators that we're actually doing a clinical development program based on patient outcomes, or at least on patient experience data. That's something that, it will go across the board from clinical development to post-marketing as well. So we can have this kind of framework going back and forth and orchestrated in a way that we're bringing value to clinical development, to bringing value to clinical practice, to bringing value to payers, to bringing value to patients, just showcasing how we can actually bring value to all these different stakeholders. I think it will be great. Hard, not sure it's impossible, but very, very hard. But you were asking in terms of, the perfect scenario. I
We
think
had a
this would
perfect,
be
yeah,
quite close to perfect, I think,
yeah,
but something that we can work towards clearly.
definitely. No, thanks. I think it gives us pause to think, right, about what we're really doing and what we're really trying to do in the community. And those are all, I think, great aspirations that we can work towards. So obviously, this is a new way of thinking, new way of working. What kind of skills or capabilities do you think medical teams need to start to hone in to really start down this path? Um, Love to hear your thoughts on that. Umberto, maybe you'll get your take on this one first.
I think become more data driven. That's one, and we were talking about it also in this discussion today. Data driven medical teams become more data driven, working closely also with different colleagues, not just with our colleagues in commercial and marketing, but also within R&D. I think that would be key. So we can start bringing also some field medical insights already to clinical development. So we don't need to spend extra time, for instance, doing different advisory boards, doing different expert meetings when we actually have that type of peer-to-peer relationship in the field. I think data storytelling, I think, could be another one on top of my mind, that also discussing with other colleagues. It's something we come across quite a lot, that sometimes the storytelling is a little bit dry, and it's not so easy to understand in some cases. So we were talking before that physicians, they don't have so much time. So if we could improve the storytelling to go maybe more straight to the point, and become more relevant, I think that would be also quite a gain for us. Digital fluency, we're becoming more and more digital, right? As we move along from this multi-channel to omni-channel to possibly opti-channel. So I think the digital fluency will need to be a competency and a skill that needs to be developed in our colleagues, also in the field, obviously.
Right.
So these ones are some of the ones that I would, again, maybe on a perfect scenario, we cannot develop all of them at the same time, but some of them, I think, that will be really relevant to focus on.
The digital analytical thinking, etc. Brooke, any other ones that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough act to follow. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think, and these are kind of maybe more the softer skills, we would say, of just ability to embrace innovation and look and search out innovation, and to just think about, we've done things this way for a while. Can we do things differently? That's not always, I think, a skill set that is inherent to medical community, but is certainly something that can be fostered. And I keep thinking about what Umberto was saying about insights and really listening, right? Listening to what our patients and our providers are saying, and then acting upon it, right? So it's one thing to gather insights through all the ways that we currently gather insights, and use data, but there's another thing to really act intelligently upon that. And that, I think, is probably something myself and all medical affairs leaders could do a better job of, as things get increasingly more complex.
Right. As you were talking about soft skills, it also brought to mind some conversations that we've had with other communities in medical affairs around just being able to communicate effectively across functions, right? To build advocacy, to build enthusiasm and excitement about what we're doing, impactful language, even maybe some financial lingo. I mean, just to make our really to galvanize what we're doing together as a company. So those are great points. As we come sort of to the close of our time together, and one last question for myself, and it's around looking to the future. What's got you excited in terms of innovation and in this age of artificial intelligence, advancements in analytics, and there's so many other things that are going on right now. One thing that's got you excited as we look to the future in this area. Brooke, maybe have you go
Sure.
first.
Yeah, I'd mentioned previously these platforms where you can essentially do a consult in real time, particularly when I think about, this is specific to oncology, but we think about community versus academic oncologist and just the number of different things that they're treating. And so these platforms that allow for that, I think that's very exciting to me, and how we can partner with those platforms to get insights. And so that's one thing. I think the other thing is, we know algorithms exist that can feed people more of what they're interested in, right? TikTok is like the best example of that, is that if you watch one video about turtles, the next thing you know, you're fed 17 more videos about turtles, right? I would love to get us to a place where medically we can feed up and tee up information that way. But it's also very agile in that if your interest changes, right? If you stop looking at the videos about turtles and start looking at the videos about dogs, that it changes in real time to send you more about dogs. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I am excited to see how we can embrace that as a medical affairs community. And in particular, not because I think it's about driving our message or driving our data. It's about getting the right data to the providers so they can make the best decision for that patient, whether that patient is in Waterloo, Iowa, or Manhattan, New York. One thing that is always I'm constantly talking about with my team is that people should just not get different care because of their providers' access to good education and data. And so, the closer we get to solving that problem, that's the stuff that really excites me.
Wonderful. That sounds like an amazing opportunity to look forward to. Humberto, one thing that gets you excited.
Yeah, Brooke was mentioning these different platforms for insights that can help us to, from an intelligence perspective, understand much better the different type of data that we collect from different data sources. I think that's something that excites me quite a lot. And also talking with other colleagues, it's something that I think we're all trying to figure out how to use technology and AI to better improve the way that we work with insights. I would say also, like Brooke, you're saying, I guess getting other type of recommendations outside pharma as well, to see what other industries are working with. Like you mentioned social media with TikTok. I would say also like Spotify or Netflix, something that comes to mind also, right? So not because of the content volume, but because of the recommendation of the quality of that content itself, right? So that will come more to the personalized and individualized aspect of it. So I guess that some early AI-enabled field content tools, they could be promising, but it's often stuck in segmentation, but not true personalization. So that's something that gets me excited. How can we move forward from this, not to get stuck in one point, and actually enable this throughout the field and throughout the organization.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I wish we could continue further on this call, but I think there's a lot more coming in the future, and I'd love to reconnect with you at a different time. With that, I'd like to thank you both for your time, your insights, your perspectives. I'm sure that they've been valuable. They've been valuable to me, and I'm sure valuable to our colleagues as well. So with that, I want to thank you both. Thank you to the participants as well for being part of this particular session. There's a few questions coming in the chat. We may have time for a couple. maybe I'll just put one out there to get us started quickly. Do you think our traditional content development and approval process is actually maybe stifling personalized or individualized communication? I always think about, we're talking a lot about context, right? In the content and the channels that we're putting out. I think traditionally what we do is we have a master, set of data points. We tend to derive a lot of content from that, put it through approval, and we end up with a lot of stuff. But maybe as we're discussing today, maybe not the right context. So just love to hear your thoughts on that briefly. Do you think our content process has to change as we think about individualization? Maybe Humberto, get your thoughts on that first.
Definitely, it's a good question. I think MLR processes also need to improve more and more. I think it's important that we have some guardrails in place, but sometimes it becomes a bottleneck. So maybe we can also utilize technology to speed up and to make MLR processes more agile. So we get, again, the right message at the right time, through the right channel, faster to the right physician. So I think that could be one of the things that we should definitely improve overall, because we know that complexity exists, and it's something that we could look into quite seriously.
Brooke, any other thoughts on that one?
Things are changing. I mean, I've seen some efforts around modular content, right, which allows for, processing and approving content and then being able to use it across multiple channels. So I think the change is happening. It's just never happens as quickly as we would like it to. But, I'm lucky to work with some incredible medical and scientific communication partners. And, I know the willingness is there. I think that the medical legal piece, I also think the willingness is there. It's just, patience in times of a significant change is always a little bit hard. And so I think while it's not moving at the pace that we would like it to, I definitely think that it is changing and evolving in a positive way.
Wonderful. Thank you both again for your time. Lovely to have you, Humberto, and Brooke as well. Really appreciate your thoughtful responses and dialogue today. Really looking forward to more as we move into the future. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.